Hello, my name is James Trost, and this is A2 Insight. Today's episode consists of highlights from our first two seasons. 35 participants have appeared on our program with a vast variety of interests, experience, talent, and topics of discussion. To begin with our journey of visitors to the set here at CTN, let's start at the beginning with our first interview and the difficult topic of addiction and addiction treatment in our community. Vince Swain, certified addiction counselor with Dawn Farm, enlightened us with an amazing story of his life and career after confronting his own addiction. Now working in the field of addiction counseling for over 15 years, Mr. Swain has helped an amazing variety of individuals dealing with addiction, including homeless, youth, jail inmates, and other folks in our community. Our discussion near the end dealt with his thoughts on the future of addiction and possible breakthroughs that may help us as a society deal more effectively with this devastating malady.
Well, what we know about the disease of addiction is like leap years ahead of what it used to be. Mm-hmm. You know, it's really not that long ago, within the last 20 years, that we've gotten more of the science in place. And I think that's an important piece, I think, for the future of anyone receiving services. Now, with that being said, I think that if you look at the history of addiction at all, historically, it's been sort of cyclical. You know, there's been moments where there's been these great changes and great services and supports, and then they sort of withered away and come back. Consistency, the thing that I've seen consistent is that people who have this disease, you know, at some point began to understand the validity of what it means to manage your life with this disease. Mm-hmm. So because of the science, because of services that still exist, and unfortunately it's few and far between, but again, this is sort of cyclical too. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that's exciting is that the communities we live in now are becoming more progressive, and not just Washtenaw County, but all over the world. The communities have become very, very progressive of having a voice, voices of recovery. All of these different communities that are functioning at on a larger scale. Mm-hmm. You know, they're connecting not just one small community, but all communities together. And so I think that part of, if you understand this disease, it's not just a physical aspect, but there's a mental, spiritual, right? And so just as much as there is a stigma of what an alcoholic, a drug addict is, or what a criminal is, right? There's also a lot of the fear of the unknown, you know? Sure. And I think that what's sort of happening, you're seeing it on television, you're seeing it on radio, you're seeing it in films, you're seeing it all over the place, is that slowly people are starting to put out there that it's okay to be in recovery. It's not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that progression has been the hugest leap. The science and the understanding that a recovering community can be a very, very powerful thing.
Christopher Taylor, Ann Arbor Mayor, discusses the possible expansion of Ann Arbor's current train station to a new location at some point in the coming years and the many challenges facing our community with its implementation.
Our station simply can't handle that right now. Further, you've mentioned commuter rail. Commuter rail is incredibly important to the quality of life of the people in the city. You know, the University of Michigan is not going to be shedding too many jobs. People are going to be coming into the city to work. They're going to either drive in or they're going to take the train in. And I want them taking the train in. Commuter rail is critically important on that east-west corridor. The only way to enable that to happen, a necessary condition for us getting commuter rail service in Ann Arbor, is to have a train station adequate to service it. And that can only be done, both those things can only be done, expansion and commuter rail service, at the Fuller Road site. There are other conditions that are necessary in order to get that off the ground too, but those are both gating items, and so we need to do it. With respect to where we are in the process, we are working with the Federal Rail Administration to get an environmental assessment finalized. It has been a long and miserable process working with the government on this. There's no denying it, and I don't, I've gotten out of the prediction business as when it's going to happen, but I very much believe it will happen because it needs to happen. The location of the station at Fuller is proper. There's no room at Depot for the parking. There's no room for the last mile transit to get in and out, to get people from that station to other places where they need to go. The proper site is, for all those purposes, is Fuller. We'll need to fix the Fuller Maiden Lane intersection. We know it, and there's no question that that intersection would be fixed and improved for the purpose of supporting its station long before a station ever arrives there.
Elizabeth Nelson, newly elected Ann Arbor City Council member, discusses her experience as a first-time candidate and how she got involved in the process.
Well, in the beginning, I have to say I was reluctant to pursue this for a long time, only because I moved here in 2004, and I think folks know that there are a lot of townies here who've grown up in Ann Arbor and lived here for decades, and so every time I read about our local politics and saw issues or read about discussion that didn't make sense to me, I always sort of told myself, well, there must be background or context that I'm not quite grasping because I haven't lived here long enough. So I say all of that to explain that the first few weeks that after I had declared my candidacy, I really tried to introduce myself to as many people as I could to familiarize myself with issues that people really focus on. There are pockets of people that are particularly focused on, for instance, the lower town zoning and the new development out there. There are people who are really, really focused on the Fuller Road train station as issue. These pockets of people who are really have done all their research on issues like the Zorro rezoning formatting. These are the people that I needed to talk to so that I could better understand these issues. And so that was the first few weeks of campaigning. And then when I felt like I had a grasp of the issues more clearly, I was very interested in hearing what residents had to say. And so mostly campaigning lately has been knocking on doors and introducing myself to people and asking them what their concerns are. And I've learned a lot from the conversations that I've had. I've been biking all over town to all the different corners of the ward, all the different neighborhoods, understanding the little niche issues that are affecting residents in certain little pockets of the city that, the people who live in the neighborhood around Dickens School, they're the only ones who know about the crumbling path between Runnymede and Pauline. I didn't know about that path. My children didn't go to Dickens. I didn't use that path. These are the things that a candidate should understand and know about so that they know what the kinds of things they're going to be advocating for when they're on council representing residents.
Jack Eaton, current Ann Arbor City Council member and former mayoral candidate, discusses his frustration with overall government bureaucracy and his attempts at getting answers during the continuing process of the train station development.
$2.8 million, and we didn't conclude it, within the period of time we had. It kind of reminds me of a student who doesn't do any of the work during the semester and then tries to pull an all-nighter the night before the exam. That's kind of the rush we've been in the last 3 months, is to try to conclude this process before our access to the money expired. And that all by itself is of major concern. And so when Ryan Stanton from the Ann Arbor News submitted a FOIA request to see the communication between the Federal Rail Administration and staff, we might have gotten an explanation as to why we didn't make better progress sooner. But whole pages of the communication were fully redacted. I mean, even the bullet points in front of the paragraphs, just pages of redacted materials. And I believe that because we're devoting local dollars, not just federal dollars, that our residents should have the right to know what this communication is. What held this up? Why haven't we made better progress? And so I brought a resolution to release that redacted information. Under the Freedom of Information Act, we can withhold information that's exempted under the Act, but we don't have to. And so there was no law that prohibited us from releasing that information. Again, that's one of those resolutions that did not pass, but it's, if you purport to be in favor of open and transparent government, that's what it would look like. Sure. Informing the residents as to where all their money is going. A staff member came to council and told us that the FRA didn't want this material released. And so the day after that meeting, I sent an email to the city administrator and asked him to show me the correspondence where that request was made. And eventually I got a response that they could find no such correspondence. So maybe it was a phone.
Sally Hart Peterson, former council member and mayoral candidate, discusses her role in helping to shape the economic future of Ann Arbor.
About 36 invited participants that represented leaders in the nonprofit sector, the private sector, University of Michigan, and greater education sector, as well as the government, state and local government. And we had a diverse group around the table from different sectors. We also kept it open to the public because we thought, this is a community conversation. So the public who attended to watch the proceedings also had a role in sharing their insights as well in terms of what does the city need to do? What are our barriers? What do we need to do to grow in a way that, again, keeps with our character and our heritage? How do we attract more technology jobs? That seems to be a path forward for Ann Arbor in terms of specific industries we might want to attract. There already is, from a startup perspective, small company perspective, a tech hub here. How do we grow that? What do we need to have? What resources do we need to have to grow that? And then how do we make Ann Arbor affordable so people who work here can also afford to live here? And that is really the greater quality of life question. How do we make Ann Arbor affordable? Which also yields the question, how do you define affordability? And that's a good task we have on our plate too. How do we define affordability? I would say that it has something to do with a resident's assessment of the value that they're receiving for the services that they're paying for. If you can say, yes, I'm getting a great value for the services I'm paying for, then Ann Arbor is affordable. I'm not sure people are saying that right now. And we need to continue to ask that question.
Jaimemogera, former candidate for Ann Arbor City Council, discussed his vision for what he hopes could be the future of our community in the coming years.
I want to lead the people where they want to go, basically, or help them get to where they want to go. I think that leadership in the case of representation in the city is about allowing the people to say what they want and the representative finding ways in which to get those things done. In 10 years from now, what I would love to see is improved walkability in the city, improved roads and design of our roads so that pedestrians and bicyclists and drivers are all safe. So all of those modes of transportation and mass transit all have to work together. And I think that we need to improve the ways in which these things commingle in our city. And this, bouncing back to the library lot, one of the concerns that I have is right now, that area surrounding the lot doesn't work very well in terms of transit for anybody. People crossing mid-block, cars backed up trying to drop off things at the library, etc. So I think we need to find these sort of trouble spots in the city and improve them. I would like, within 10 years, to see that we've really embraced things to manage stormwater and improve the environmental aspects of our community to where we do have gardens in places where ordinarily we would just see plain buildings and whatnot. I would like to see refined city services. So, residents really care about, again, that layer on the inside of how does it affect me every day, what's outside my front door. Using technology and information to improve the city services, whether it be the garbage trucks, recycling, whatever, finding ways to make those as efficient as possible. And on my radio show, actually, each week, I talk about the ways in which technology and data are used to improve city services. So I'd like to go in that direction. And improve communication and transparency. Some residents have voiced to me that they felt like they were not responded to by our local government, or that they felt information was being kept from them. And I want to find a way to sort of bridge that communication so that it is free-flowing, and that so residents really feel like their government.
Gordon Craple, current council member, discusses his vision for the future in his attempt to run for re-election in last year's Ward 4 Council.
I think I think I'm somewhat unique in Ann Arbor because I am the only elected veteran within the city of Ann Arbor. I think I bring a very different perspective than many of my my council mates, and I think that's important. I think my approach is different. As I said, I tend to be very pragmatic in how I approach things, and really try to gather the information and make decisions based on fact. And I try to take the emotion out and look at issues and try to get to the core of what it's really about and what it's going to take to resolve the issue or figure out the best answer for it.
The nonprofit world was the topic with our next guest, John Pike, president of Philanthropy Solutions and adjunct professor in political science at the Eastern Michigan University. Mr. Pike discusses the mission of his organization and challenges facing the nonprofit world.
I started Philanthropy Solutions because I wanted to be able to train people in charities, particularly boards and staff, about fundraising. Wanted to share with them some of my experiences, but also I began to be much more concerned than I had been previously about how charities are managed. And as a fundraiser with two rather large organizations, one a national organization but having a local outlet, and then the DIA, another very large organization, I began to see that there are ways in which the management of an organization can really interfere with its fundraising. And yet it needs that money, and so it needs to change its management style in order to be able to raise the continuing, hopefully, more money that they need. And so I started Philanthropy Solutions as an educational effort, and basically what I did was to work with boards and work with staff on training them how to be good fundraisers, but also in the process how to be good boards, how to have an effective board, how to make decisions as a board relative to the community and to fundraising in such a way that the organization would be strengthened. Charity is not that responsible. Charity is not necessarily that accountable to the larger society. And there's a lot of board members that sort of pride themselves on not being accountable to anybody. I mean, but really, they're accountable to the people of the community. And so recognizing this, and of course there's, I'm not the only one out here saying this. John Carver, for example, is one of the premier intellectuals on board training and board work. And so he would say that the board's ultimate accountability is toward the public, not toward the organization.
Emeritus U of M Professor George Whelan brings alive Ann Arbor history and the contributions of German immigrants to this area and their initial arrival in the 1830s, while discussing his book about German life in Ann Arbor. Like other immigrant groups in history coming to the Ann Arbor area, Germans were no strangers to animus and challenges in earlier times, particularly during the First World War.
Yes, it was pretty traumatic. Muslims today have a problem, but Germans, in my book, I've got cartoons from Life magazine, and starting in 1915 already, there were derogatory cartoons about Germans. There was this great antipathy toward Germans. It developed slowly, because we didn't get into the war until when? 1918? 1917, okay. So it developed slowly, but there was a lot. There was even a German lynched in, I think it was Illinois. So in the book, I have a couple advertisements, illustrations of advertisements from a newspaper. And at the end of 1917, the German newspaper changed everything, including even ads, changed to English. So there was a German language ad for the Michigan Union Brewery. That was the big brewery on the Old West Side. And the ad extolled the healthful virtues. Beer was very good for you, and it's pure, etc. The January 1918, the ad was in English, and it emphasized, instead of the healthful aspects of it, emphasized we deliver anywhere in town. So I think everything, even the society columns, changed to English. It was people, as I describe in the book, people couldn't speak German in public because others would point, and actually that happened in World War II. People in New York City, German Jews who were refugees, told me that they didn't dare speak German in public on the subway or out on the sidewalk anywhere, because there were so many Eastern European Jews, and they were raised with Yiddish, which is a dialect of German. And when they heard somebody speaking German, they thought immediately, here is one of those hated Germans, even though these were German refugees, German Jewish refugees.
Roy Wetzel, former NBC executive and University Music Society patron, discusses a growing trend in Ann Arbor: seniors moving to the downtown area to take advantage of the many opportunities available for this expanding age group in our community.
We set out on the initial decision wasn't that we wanted to move to Ann Arbor. The initial decision was that we didn't think we wanted to retire in Manhattan. For a lot of reasons, so we set out on we came back here actually to visit friends in the fall of 1991. A fraternity brother of mine, as a matter of fact, who had just come back to Ann Arbor from Australia, where he'd been the chief lawyer in Asia for the Ford Motor Company, and they were living in a house out at Travis Point. Yes, Travis Point. And we looked around Ann Arbor because we thought we knew the town a little bit. Obviously, it had changed enormously in the time we had been away, but we'd heard good things about it all over the years, and we looked around, and he hooked us up with a realtor who took us. We told her we needed a big building. We needed to be up in a New York kind of building, and there weren't that many in Ann Arbor at that time. And indeed, there was only one that really seemed to meet the criteria that we had, and that was a place called Sloan Plaza, which is where we ended up living. But there was nothing available at Sloan Plaza at that point. So we went back to Manhattan and continued to contemplate what we might do next. My wife, by the way, at that point was still working. She hadn't retired. I went off to Germany for a few weeks for a visit, and But the realtor called us one day and said, there is an apartment going to come on the market tomorrow at Sloan Plaza, and so we flew out the next day from Manhattan and took a look at it, and it was one of the larger apartments in the building, up on the 7th floor, and so we that night signed the deal, and we didn't actually close it for a few weeks, of course, you know how that goes, and closed it in January of '92. Went off to Bermuda for a few weeks to celebrate, and as we had actually in January of 1989 after I retired. Bermuda because Bermuda was very easy to get to from Manhattan. It was a quick flight, so we kind of liked it as a vacation spot. But had Sloan Plaza not been here with a staff in the lobby.
The challenges of running a print magazine publication in today's world of digital media and the internet are explored with Ann Arbor Observer editor John Hilton.
Well, we do hope to find some additional sources of revenue, obviously, so we can sustain some of the editorial things we do that are, for example, the calendar also had to shrink substantially, and they did some rearranging there that has made it, so they were able to cram more information into the same space. But it does mean that you have to read through the whole first week of the month for the repeating events. For something that happens every Tuesday, for example, we now list only on the first Tuesday, and then say, other Tuesdays people have to trust to go back and look. So we're hopeful that we'll find that. We do have a sound business model, which simply says that we'll do the best publication we can with the advertising we sell. And I'm still at a loss for why that wasn't true for the Ann Arbor News as well. It just seems like if you have a commitment to the work, which is explaining the community to itself, letting people understand the people and the processes that brought us here and that are taking us forward, you can find a way to do it. As I said, it was a very painful time in 08 and 09, but we found a way to do it, and extraordinarily, what we did that one time has worked ever since. It has been, it's been a real delight to discover that people who said that print would be gone in a year or 5 years were wrong. It's at some point it's going to continue to decline, I'm sure. But there's nothing like it. We just got the Ann Arbor News circulation numbers for our city guide yesterday, and they're down to 17,000 on Thursdays, and I think 23 on Sundays. And I remember when they were 75. So there's definitely a need for what we're doing. And we try to do it as well as we can in the space that our advertisers give us.
The Ann Arbor local residential real estate market was a discussion with our next guest, Jane Tharp, giving us insight into some of the hot and upcoming markets in Ann Arbor and the surrounding communities.
In Ann Arbor right now on Geddes Road, the northeast side. And then if you come around like Barton Hills, Saline, of course, is a hot area, and we're always looking for places there. And if you come around, then Manchester's, believe it or not, Manchester's coming up, and they're surging in their market because people are looking for some land now, and they want to move outside of the city. So you're looking in that area, you get a good value in the Manchester area, the Milan area, the Ypsi area. And Ypsi is really coming along. They're doing a lot to develop that area and try to get rid of that stigma that Ypsi has. And quite frankly, it's with Eastern Michigan there and Washtenaw School there. It's a beautiful area, and the campus on Eastern is beautiful. And the Riverwalk is great. So you have a lot of variety there, and you're also within Washtenaw County, so you can have school of choice if you choose not to go to, like the Ypsi schools, for instance. Saline, you have to go to their schools. So those are sort of the up-and-coming areas. But Ann Arbor, downtown, is also an up-and-coming area with all the new condo building. It's amazing, truly amazing. I mean, for instance, like last year in Washtenaw County alone, the residential listing in Washtenaw County only averaged 321,000, which was a 10% increase from April of 2016. In Ann Arbor, in April, the average listing price in April was 478,000. Almost 479,000 in the Ann Arbor area.
As society struggles how to best address the challenges of substance abuse disorders and criminal activity, Sheriff Jerry Clayton gives us his take on what he hopes to accomplish with this population in the coming years from a law enforcement perspective, and the recent millage passage providing more funding to work with substance abuse disorders and mental health challenges in our community.
We're a county of about 358,000. If you look at the rest of the state, for our population, we have one of the lowest number of beds per capita in the state. And you'll never hear me advocate for more beds, because if you build it, we'll fill it. So there's a couple of things. So we have a very low bed utilization. We think we could drive it down lower. We know that about 50%, over 50% of the people in our jail are on some kind of psychotropic medication. So they don't have a severe mental illness, but they have some kind of mental health challenge that they're taking medication. We also know that a large percentage of those individuals have a dual diagnosis, some kind of substance use disorder. So we know that piece. We know that with the cuts that have happened at the state level, that mental health services aren't as readily available as they have been. And what we've started to see, although our population has averaged around the same, the construct of that population has been a little different. More and more people with mental health challenges. So not only in our jails, but our deputy sheriffs on the road are coming in contact with. So we know that at the county level, we have to be more proactive. So I'll give you some examples of what we believe we should be doing with some of those dollars. We believe we should have more of a comprehensive strategy where people that have mental health challenges are addressed on the front end, more proactively. That if we as first responders come in contact with them, as opposed to right now the only two choices we have, if there's a criminal behavior, they end up in jail. If it's not as serious criminal behavior, they end up in one of our major healthcare systems. We have to have what we call a community crisis strategy. Where else can they go? Where's a place where they can go with the appropriate resources, get triaged and addressed and get stabilized so they can go back home as opposed to ending up in jail? So we're looking at programs like that. We're looking at programs called law enforcement assisted diversion for those with substance use disorder, right? So again, police officer comes in contact with someone, they have a small amount of drugs or paraphernalia. As opposed to them going to jail, if we know they have a substance use disorder, let's connect them to a case manager. Let's get someone that can help assess them, address. It's not only the substance use disorder that's impacting them, it's other things. It's housing, it's transportation, it's education, it's all those, it's trauma, it's depression. All of those things. How can we help that person navigate those issues so when they're ready to get off of the drugs, they're in a better position to successfully do that? So again, they're not reoffending. They're not committing crimes to feed a habit. So we're reducing victimization. We take someone that was less of a contributing member to the community and making them a contributing member to the community. But all of that stuff has to be done in a thoughtful, strategic way, and you need dollars to help do that. So, as quickly as I can in a broad brush, those are the type of initiatives that we're looking at.
Continuing on the theme of how best we can serve the increasing numbers of those suffering from addiction, youthful advocates at Eastern Michigan University discuss their methods and plans to help reach a younger audience to avoid longer-term consequences of substance abuse. Justin Jaweski and Amber Horwitz of Students for Recovery at EMU.
I think what we're trying to accomplish is to be able to hold that ideology of saying we are people in recovery, it's okay, we're here, we can be a part of the community, right? And I don't have to look like what everybody proposes of that stigma looks like, right? And for me, going into education, I think that's an important part of my future. I know individuals at EMU who, keep their recovery under wraps, right? And who are not willing to engage with teachers and say, they're a person in recovery. And today, I feel like it's important for us as young people and moving forward, especially for young people struggling in that area, that it's okay to seek out recovery, right? It's okay to get help because your future doesn't have to look like someone who's addicted to drugs and alcohol. Your future can look like a teacher, right? Your future can look like a social worker, right? And I think it's important for us to take that shame away, right? And hold that pride, right? And that confidence that I am a person in recovery, I understand this, and I'm responsible for my recovery today. And I think that we just add at Students for Recovery, we just add another aspect, another dynamic of that, right? That opportunity to engage with someone who is 20 years old, like you said earlier, who is dabbling in alcohol and drugs, right? Who may be able to see those signs earlier, right? We are engaging with interventions at a younger age instead of waiting for that alcoholic to be 40, 50, 60 years old. And I think it's the responsibility of the university, right, to engage in these matters. I mean, we see it at all levels of government, right? We're talking about how big of an epidemic we are dealing with here in America, right? And people are dying from this opiate epidemic, right? And I think it's important for us to be able to be there on the front lines and, you know, be engaged, educated, understanding, and able to be, you know, the difference maker in the situation, right? To be able to move forward in this process, to actually be a collegiate recovery program, right? And be able to move forward and be the ones educating, be the ones giving the understanding. And, you know, that's important for me, and that's what I want to see out of Students for Recovery. Because if I could have went somewhere when I got to EMU to where I could have found a little fellowship, a little sense of belonging, you know, it would have been enhancing to my recovery, and it would have been important to me, right? And I think my family would have, you know, appreciated those things over at Eastern Michigan University also.
And to carry on from what you were saying, that's what, with my legacy, what I hope to accomplish is just to emphasize the population that already exists on our campus. I don't need to find people, they're already there. They're already there, they just don't know where to go, and they don't have a place to go. They have our student organization, of course, but we want something that's professional and really just fueled by the university. Like Justin was saying, it's everywhere, it's an epidemic. You know, we just had an overdose on campus last week from heroin that the individual had to be revived. And, you know, I just wonder, like, you know, is there any way we can help these students on a primary level before they find themselves going to there? You know what I mean? I know Justin can relate. We've lost so many people close to us this year through overdose that it's overwhelming.
One of the last interviews we did for 2017 was dealing again with the issue of substance abuse and mental health in our county. Washtenaw County Community Mental Health Executive Director Chris Tortez gives us her take on what she hopes to accomplish with her leadership, helping those in the community struggling with mental health issues for the next 5 years.
We want to improve the quality of life of individuals with intellectual development disabilities and mental illness, and make sure that we are working to support and in conjunction with our partners that everybody meets kind of their fullest potential. So that's ultimately my vision. But in the next 5 years, I think that really helping to really bring all the community partners together and continue to work collaboratively to collectively work on these issues is, I think, a really big part of our role, because it's going to take all of us working in partnership to really reach that ultimate vision. So there are very kind of specific things in the next 5 years are really continue to do the work that we're doing with our law enforcement in decriminalizing mental health issues and making sure that people are getting to the right place at the right time. Really working with our schools and early prevention, and really see if we can certainly stop the increase that we're seeing and get people more connected. And I also think that working with continue to work with our providers, our individuals, around making sure that adults with developmental disabilities or intellectual disabilities also are reaching their fullest potential. And so how we do that with our families and our providers will be really important. So and then again, I'm making sure that we can maximize and diversify and stabilize our funding. So that's what's on the short list.
Our next interview is a discussion with long-term commercial real estate broker Jim Chaconis, talking about the changing face of the downtown Ann Arbor business landmarks.
Shopping center, I run Courtyard, the little bookstore in there. Those seem to trend back up a little bit, but it's basically food. You take a look at Dexter, it's restaurants. You take a look at Chelsea, the Common Grill, they put a brewery downtown. So it's really kind of food use, which makes people walkable, and maybe a few antique stores. But I think the shopping, we always have people say, well, we want downtown shopping, but they don't shop there. So, if you shop there, they would stay.
Dr. Robert Pasick, psychologist and founder of a local leadership group, Leaders Connect, discusses what makes for a successful leader.
First of all, it's knowing how you feel. And I mentioned I worked a lot with men over the years, and I remember a guy, Dave, I think it was his name, and he came in to see me, and he said, Dr. Pasick, when I started working with you, I thought there were only 2 feelings. And I said, well, what are those, Dave? He said, well, good and bad. And now I realize there's a whole host of feelings, you know, and I used to have up that, you know, little chart that had 15 different emotions, facial emotions, and I'd start working with people. What are these emotions? And so people would learn, oh, that's, you know, I'm saying I'm frustrated. You know, you hear people say, I'm not angry, I'm frustrated. No, you're angry, you know, or no, you're not angry, you're enraged. So those subtleties are learned, and I think like anything else, it starts in early childhood and family. Some families help their kids to identify those emotions, some never go there. There's a big gender difference. So women tend to be more socialized to pick up on the nuances of emotion. Men like you and I are taught, like, suppress those emotions, you don't have feelings, you're supposed to be tough and stoic and don't ever admit any feelings of weakness. You know, if you're attacked, attack back, never admit that you're weak. And so, and it's impossible. We're all afraid, we're all worried, you know, whether you're a teacher or you're a cop or you're a football player or whatever, there's always those moments where you're afraid, and if you're not allowing yourself to experience it, you're going to be in trouble.
Interesting. Peter Fayroyan, head of school at Ann Arbor Green Hills Independent School, discusses the unique aspects of the educational program available there.
So it's really interesting. They laid it out, and I would give you the percentage, but I can't remember what it is, of a household income. And then the school, once they decided upon that tuition, the school was going to commit to having 10% of its operating budget be committed to financial aid. So to make sure that not only was, unlike, really frankly, most all of our peer schools, I know for people in the Midwest in particular, or people that aren't used to the thought of paying for school other than their taxes, the idea of $22,000 is unimaginable to them. I just came from a school that charges $65,000, and then we all know what college charges. But it's still within reach of many of our families who may.
David Leach, director of bands at Pioneer High School, discusses with us aspects of the Ann Arbor Public Schools music program which makes it stand out as one of the best in the country.
It's education. Because of groups like the University Musical Society, who bring in the best musicians in the world to play in our town, because the University of Michigan has arguably one of the best music programs in the country, which means students can access private lessons or can just hear the top talent at the collegiate and professional level play their instrument. I mean, the first time I heard the Duke Ellington Band was in Briarwood Mall, of all places. And so I now can go listen to Wynton Marsalis, the Jazz at Lincoln Center, arguably the best jazz band playing today, come into Ann Arbor every year. I've heard the New York Philharmonic, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra here and at their home auditoriums, and it's just stunning to have a kid have the opportunity to go listen to Chris Martin, who's the principal trumpet at New York, play, to have that concept of sound. I don't have to listen to a recording or go download it. I can just have the UMS give me a fairly inexpensive, if not free, ticket to something like that. And it shouldn't go without some sense of a flag of importance that the community of Ann Arbor has sponsored it since before you and I were children. Ann Arbor Schools a long time ago said that every 5th grader will have the opportunity to play an instrument and be given one for free. That is the biggest gift I think Ann Arbor Schools gives its students. Whether you pursue it beyond the 5th and 6th grade, you have that tactile learning. And so I think if you know research, they talk about musicians read better than most folks because it's a mechanical process. You're not just watching letters and words go by, it becomes mechanical. And so you read more passionately, you read more aggressively because now it's associated with something that you do physically, and now you're attached to emotions that go along with it. So I think musicians tend to be fervent readers, which allows their mind to be able to do that. I think we're also bilingual because no longer do we just read the English language, we have to read notation, which expands the mind, which allows us to decode quicker, because we're not only decoding words, but we're coding fingers and accents and slurs and all the kinds of stuff that music does. But that, starting in 5th grade, is probably the best gift that Ann Arbor gives all children, not just children of affluency or children of any particular denomination, anything. Every child gets the opportunity and a free instrument, and that is probably the largest thing.
Dennis Pink, local psychiatrist, discusses the importance of the development of internal coping mechanisms necessary to address the sad and growing trend of youth suicide and suicidal ideation in Washtenaw County.
Knowing how to be by themselves, that they've learned, they have all these gadgets, you know, they have their computers, they have their phones, they have their music they're listening to. They're not used to alone time. And one of the things that happens that is, it's what a fellow by the name of Viktor Frankl talked about. He said there's an existential vacuum that's created. And why am I existing? What do I do? What purpose do I have in life? This is related to that suicidal stuff too, the suicidal ideation. And what he said was, if you can figure out a why, you'll figure out a how. Why? You know, many people, their meaning in life comes from their work. It comes from their family. It comes from the relationships they have. It comes from spiritual meaning, whether it's religious or non-religious spirituality. And our society has lost a lot of that. You know, the relationship, and it's also tied back to what I was talking about before, of consequences for behavior and failing, to see the relationship between what I do and what happens to me. Whether it's motivation to work, whether it's motivation to do well in school, that connection has been lost.
Best-selling author and U of M professor Scott Ellsworth discusses his book, The Secret Game, dealing with the first interracial collegiate basketball game in the 1940s and its lasting impact on our society.
It's kind of hard to think about it in these days, but you're exactly right, Jim, and one key element is to think about when this happens. I mean, this is 10 years before the Civil Rights Movement. It's 20 years before the March on Selma. In fact, it is 3 years before Jackie Robinson desegregates Major League Baseball, and that's in the North. To give you, you know, they certainly, if they were discovered, what could have happened? Well, they would have all gotten kicked out of school. They would have ended their careers. The chance for the Duke students, who were also medical students, to become doctors would have ended. They would have been drafted immediately and sent to the front lines. Ditto for the students at North Carolina College. John McClendon would have, lost his job surely. But here's what we don't really think about. We think about segregation as maybe just, drinking fountains and lunch counters and things like that. But it was not that way. And when you crossed the color line in the South during the height of Jim Crow, you really took your life into your hands. There was an African-American GI from Philadelphia who boarded a city bus in Durham, refused to move into the back, eventually got into an argument with the white bus driver. When the driver pulled up at the end of the line, the soldier apologized first for his behavior. Then he walked off the bus, and the white driver murdered the black soldier, and the white driver in a trial was acquitted. So if you cross the color line willingly, anything could have happened. They certainly would have been arrested, but who knows what could have happened.
John Branch, professor at the University of Michigan and author, discusses his book, Globalization and Higher Education, and discusses the impact that the globalization of higher education impacts not only nationally but locally here, the future of higher education.
I think which I would use is accountability. Who is accountable for higher education? And it raises some very good political questions. Is the government accountable? Is it a market-based system, and therefore at the end of the day, buyer beware, right? Caveat emptor, right? Is that?
Caveat emptor.
Caveat emptor. Is it buyer beware? Ought we to be asking universities to demonstrate the value of an education? Is it accreditation agencies? Who is accountable for higher education? You raised the issue of price. I'm a father of 3. My oldest has just turned 16, so I'm thinking a lot about higher education. I believe that the University of Michigan offers an incredible value, but relative to Norway, for example, where higher education is free, including for foreign students, the University of Michigan is quite expensive. But the University of Michigan is relatively inexpensive if you compare it to out-of-state fees or swanky private universities, which are $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 all in. So does that bring us back to globalization and a market for higher education? Will I send my children to the Norwegian School of Economics for free? Will I keep them here at the University of Michigan? We shall see.
Scott E. Page, U of M professor and author, discusses his book, The Diversity Bonus, and the importance of diversity in today's competitive global economy.
Laszlo Bock, who used to run the people team at Google, he was teasing me one time about how Scott has said, you are not a vector, you're a toolbox, in the sense that, I'm not a thermometer, I'm a toolbox, in the sense that we tend to think, okay, let's think of college admissions for a second. There's SAT score plus grade point average, that's your ability. So I can, line people up from, tallest to shortest or something, or, smartest to dumbest. But the reality is, you're this, toolbox full of things, you know how to fix a car, or you know how to use, macros in Excel, or you know how to run a sophisticated camera, or there's things, so there's this set of things you know how to do. And this is kind of like Reid Hoffman's dream, right? LinkedIn, think of LinkedIn. Right. What do you do on LinkedIn? You're badged kind of for all these skills, right? And if you work at, here's a company that's way ahead of the curve on this, IDEO. Within IDEO, you literally get, sort of badged or, approved for a skill in leading teams, meeting with a client, designing a survey, so there's a whole set of literal, it's like you're allowed to use the chainsaw sort of thing if you worked at a construction company. And if you think of yourself that way, it's really freeing because you think that for me to make a contribution to the world, for me to do something sort of meaningful and useful and productive, what do I need to do? I don't need to score this high on this test, right? I don't need to have this IQ because you're kind of maybe born with that. You need to build a tool set, right? And a set of experiences and a set of ways of thinking that it'll enable you to do what you want to do, to contribute to what you want to do. And one of the ways, going back to the diversity thing, that you'll be able to contribute is to develop different sets of tools than other people, right? And if you have those different sets of tools, you'll be, super useful. So paradoxically, I'm bringing mathematical tools into the space of diversity, which most people don't, right? So I'm literally following my own advice after the fact.
Earl Lewis, director of the U of M's Center for Social Solutions, discusses the issues that are facing us in terms of long-term problems in our society and how best we can deal with them.
5 years, if I came back, I'd like to be able to say that the center did 3 things. One, it connected people in institutions who weren't connected. And I mean, as I mentioned, MIT and Carnegie Mellon. So the presidents of both places are friends of mine. One used to be my neighbor here in Ann Arbor, Farnham Jahanian, the new president of Carnegie Mellon. But they actually don't know what the other one is doing. Raphael Reif is the president of MIT. And so there's a way in which we actually perhaps, because we have relationships across a whole set of institutions, we can be matchmaker when matchmaker is necessary, interlocutor when interlocutor is important, and if nothing else, the keeper of the transition of information as we move it from one place to another. So that's one thing. 2, I actually like to be able to educate a whole generation of students, undergrad and graduate students, to believe that problems can be solved. It's not that we just study problems, but that actually you can work in a tangible way and approach some kind of solution to problems. You can't do it alone. You have to do it and with others because these problems are complex. It goes back to Scott's book in a way, the diversity bonus, that you actually need for these complex problems, complex and diverse teams working on them. But I like students to actually believe that they can be the architects of the future they desire. And if we can do that, that will be successful. And I think the third part is that at the end of 5 years, I'll come back and say, I had fun doing it. I had a lot of fun doing it. We learned a lot. We made mistakes. We learned from those mistakes. But in our own way, we hopefully have helped to improve the world.
The Ann Arbor community is most fortunate to have a strong sense of the importance of preserving historical buildings in the area. Local authors Pat McCauley and Susan Weinberg discuss their book, Ann Arbor Architectural History, and what makes Ann Arbor unique in historic preservation.
We are definitely very happy to live in modern times, although there's many things to be desired in our country that aren't going on right now. But for me personally, just working with these buildings hands-on was very informative about just the quality of construction, something that's completely irreplaceable. You cannot build things out of wood anymore. You know, you can't have wood siding that's going to last for 150 or 200 years like some of these buildings have. And it's a completely irreplaceable resource. And the other thing I would just say too, before Susan goes, if every great city in America or the world has tried to preserve its historic buildings, there's something special about them, and I think everyone would agree when you're walking down Main Street, what is it about Main Street that's so special? It's those old 150-year-old buildings. And there's some new ones in there, but the general character of that is given by the 150-year-old buildings that are on Main Street. And I think that's just an irreplaceable resource that really can only be had from old buildings. You cannot reproduce that in a new building.
So I wrote down 3 things to say.
Okay.
One was there's an economic component to it, which is that older buildings are more affordable. And if you're having an affordability crisis, which we are, it's better to try to fix up the old buildings you have than replace them with new, because new is always more expensive.
Yeah, the cost of new construction.
The cost of new
outrageous.
construction is terrible. Then there's an aesthetic to it, which is that they are human-sized buildings that make it encourage you to do things like walk and take walks in a neighborhood, and pop in here, pop in there. And to me, most buildings, all buildings, are a form of public art. You look at this every day, and that's when you walk around, that's really all you see are buildings. It's very rare that you look at something else. And so to me, it's important that they're attractive. And I can't say that I like modern architecture, but I don't think what's going up in Ann Arbor now is terribly attractive. And it's also overwhelming the small character of the neighborhoods right abutting it. A 2-story house next to a 19-story building I don't think that's a good arrangement. And my third thing was that, our past informs our present, and we need to know where we came from, and we need the stories that buildings can tell. It's very hard to tell a story without the building. And that's like, we use our museum on Main Street, that's the Historical Society, to tell the story of Washtenaw County and of building construction, because it's a really old building. It's from 1830. It has 3 parts, and they're all different, 35,
I think,
37, and 39. So you can see already differences in construction techniques that the people from New England were bringing with them, but then they were getting into new ways of framing buildings, and you can see that there. And one of the things that interested me about his house was that it had this old New England framing. And I went, we give our dog and pony show, and I always say, exposed corner posts, and that's that's what got me excited about his house. Oh, not too many.
Neil Hajra, president of the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation, discusses his organization's many contributions to improve the quality of life in our community through their investments in our county.
Area Community Foundation is to enrich the quality of life in Washtenaw County. Way back in 1963, residents of the county decided that we needed an organization to host permanent charitable funds that provide unending perpetual support to great local nonprofits. So here's the great part of the story. Since 1963, our foundation has distributed over $50 million locally in grants and scholarships to support great nonprofits. there's really three ways you can look at what we do. Our most unique characteristic is that we're the only organization that holds permanent charitable funds that broadly serve the community in Washtenaw County. The second thing we do, so we hold those funds, we're a financial institution in that sense. We're also a platform for philanthropy, so we partner with donors to help them magnify their impact and honor their legacies through permanent funds. The third thing we do is we partner with nonprofits because frankly, we're a source of capital, but it's nonprofits that do the hard work of turning our support into impact. It's a critical relationship between us and the grantees that we support. And then the fourth thing we do is we partner with other community institutions. So we very rarely work in a vacuum. We and other institutions in the Ann Arbor area and in Washtenaw County, a lot of us believe that our impact is so much greater when we magnify each other's work rather than working in silos. And so I guess that my last observation is we are unique in Washtenaw County in terms of being based here and being a host of 550 permanent charitable funds. However, there are 800 community foundations around the country. There's over 60 in Michigan. So we are not an uncommon model throughout the country, but we are really Washtenaw County's primary source of permanent charitable capital.
Jeff Sorensen, director of the Center for Social Innovation at the College of LS&A at the U of M, discusses how current and former U of M students and alums are making a difference in today's world.
You know, we were 21 years old, almost finished with our time at a great university. And in many ways, we'd had a very good education, had learned a lot, had started to see the world through new perspectives and meeting different kinds of people who see things differently. But at the same time, we all were a little bit frustrated by the idea that, here we were at sort of the end of our education, and pretty much the whole time we'd been doing things other people told us were important to do. So from the very beginning, it's teachers assigning you the problem set, and then you do those problems. Or it's in college and a professor assigns a prompt and you write for that prompt. And there's some amount of freedom in there, but we thought it was a little bit crazy that we were seniors in college and no one had ever really asked us, if you could change something, what would you change? If you could work on something not because anyone's assigning it to you, but just because you believe it's so important that it needs to be worked on, what would you work on? And do you have ideas for how you might be able to make some of those things better? And so we kind of put that question out to our fellow students, and we went to the middle of campus and had this big whiteboard that said, if you could change something, what would you change? And by the end of the day, we had these paint markers, and students had put hundreds of things on here. We had just like massive boards full of ideas, and we thought, well, that's amazing. Clearly, there's a lot of things that students want to be working on and things that students care about. But there wasn't just an easy place that students could go, and so much is siloed off by disciplines that if you're a political science student, you're only really seeing political science students most of the time. If you're a biology student, biochemistry student like my co-founder was, he and I almost never had a chance to work together on anything. And so we thought, well, okay, we've gotten people to the point where they said someone needs to do something about these things. And so the organization, we thought, well, we should start something that just asks people, why not you? Why not me? And decided if the university is not going to do this, we'll just do it as a student organization. And then, of course, over the last, so many students got involved that the university actually got interested in it and said, hey, what if you kept doing this after you graduated? And we were interested, and so we ended up getting hired to continue the work. There's still a student-led organization, but we were hired to sort of mentor them and help them go from year to year and keep growing the program. And ultimately, we built a whole new department around it that I'm not the director of. So.
Ned Stabler, Vice President of Wayne State University and President of Techtown, discusses what he thinks it takes to be an entrepreneur and the concept of risk as a requirement for business success.
To answer, and if you go look at data and studies, there are a lot of differing opinions on whether you can do that or not. We spent a lot of time with the Gallup folks, like the polling kind of people who spend a lot of time working on things like strength finders and doing assessments of individuals and trying to figure out what you have at your core. They have a whole system around entrepreneurship. It used to be called EP10, but I think they've changed it because that's a horrible name to something else. And they believe entrepreneurs are born, not made. Maybe. I think to some extent that's true. There's certainly some characteristics that people are naturally born with more of or less than. A tolerance for risk, being willing to be a little stubborn and tell people, I know you say this isn't right. Paradoxically, also being flexible. This is my favorite things. We tell entrepreneurs never take no for an answer, but also be coachable, right? It's kind of silly like that. I would argue that it's tough to do, but if folks want to do it, you can help support them. And much like anything else, it's like a muscle. If you practice.
Kimberly Hearns, Vice President for Instruction at Washtenaw Community College, expands on the definition of risk in the context of its role at the college's Center for Entrepreneurship.
I do think that, there are a lot of things in society that, you kind of grow out of your ability to take risk. Sometimes we beat that out or teach that out of each other. And so one of the things, I've repeated a lot the word confidence. So one of the things that we work a lot on is making sure that the center is a hub, that everybody is included. It's a very inclusive and diverse environment, so that the number one thing we think we do is build that confidence for our students. So we have an annual pitch competition, and the students actually, instead of just signing up for the pitch competition and doing it, they go through a series of workshops. We have coaches who come and help them and talk them through that process, because it is for the students, for our students, doing that pitch competition is a big risk for them. But we also know that it's a process of learning how to take risk that is going to be more beneficial for them in the long term. We also talk a lot about confidence as well as failure. It's okay to fail, and failing is a lesson. That's how we learn. And so I think using that vernacular has been how we model and teach the students that, the world's a risky place, but there's a lot of reward to risk, and you can't win if you don't take risks. So it's more of those kind of soft skills that we talk about a lot. Us adding that as a soft skill and something that needs to be taught to our students is, risk is not a bad thing. It should be calculated. It should be prepared for. It should be thoughtful, but it's how we learn. And if we fail, when we do our pitch competition, the thing that's so amazing is that those students have worked for months and months to do their pitch. And when you look out in the room and the students who don't win, they did win. They won because they learned how to prepare for a process and take a risk, and that's something that we attempt to model through the Entrepreneurship Center in a lot of different ways. Even we talk to the faculty about, if they come up with the idea and they vet it and put together the financials, then they can see that may or may not be a risk worth taking. But, really teaching them how to prepare for it, and that it's part of the process of learning.
Journalist and author Jack Lessenberry enlightens us with his take on the current state of journalism, both locally and nationally, with the advent of the internet and the growing trend of social media.
Michigan's revenue sharing structure. You're going home alone. So you're absolutely right, and that's the problem. Our problem has always been in this business to make the significant interesting, and it's very easy to get people to watch Kim Kardashian or whatever Kardashian it is, but when Ted Turner invented that model, he didn't see it as today. He thought he would just have news that people could watch when it suited them. That it wouldn't be, and he wanted serious news. I met him not long after he started that. I was in the Philippines. He was in a swimming pool. He's a brash, swashbuckling guy. He got up, talked to me. He said, "You ought to come work for me." He said, "We got a TV station where people don't necessarily have to be good looking." So he got me right. And if you look at the early CNN, they didn't have glamorous anchors, but then it got sold and it got glitzed up. And if you were from Mars and you were watching CNN, for example, you would conclude that all the experts on news are very young, very pretty people. 80% of them young women who look like they're about 30 years old or younger.
In a cocktail dress.
In a cocktail dress. No Helen Thomas is allowed, thank you. No Walter Cronkite's allowed. And of course, you've got to hype things up. The breaking news, which usually isn't breaking news at all, it sort of scares people sometimes. I remember my mother, who's long dead now, but she was still alive at the time of 9/11. She would in a little tract house. She watched CNN all the time, and she was convinced Osama bin Laden was coming to her house to kill her personally. And I told her, "You're really not on the prime target list. I hate to break it to you." So I think there is a thing called the CNN effect. But the point is, how do you get people interested in what's really happening? And this is let me give you an example. In the year 1998. There was this magazine called Foreign Affairs, Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, And they had this interesting article that nobody said, hey, you know, we were off in Afghanistan. We found this guy named Osama bin Laden. He's got a lot of money, and he's training all these people. He says he's going to kill Americans in America. Very little of that got in the mainstream press, because you know what we were writing about? Monica Lewinsky and the blue dress. In the long run, we might have been better served. We paid a little more attention to Osama bin Laden. We might be better served now if we're paying attention to things like the economy. And nobody, when you and I'm sure I'm older than you, when you and I were kids, nobody ever thought that we would have economic competition from China. And how we miss that. But you know what? Journalists are out there. They're doing the best they can. They're doing the best they can to inform us. And you asked me about the future. I know a lot about the past. I know a fair amount about the present. Absolutely lousy at predicting the future. I'm hoping somebody will come up with a model and will come up with something. I think it will. Because if we're going to survive as a democracy, we have to be informed. You know what? When they wrote the Constitution and Benjamin Franklin came out of where they were writing it, a woman on the street said, "What kind of government did you give us, Dr. Franklin?" He said, "A republic, if you can keep it." It's up to us to keep it.
Mary King, Executive Director of the Michigan Council on Crime and Delinquency, discusses her hopes for criminal justice reform in the coming years.
The lowest age, too, because in Michigan there is no legislation that says no child under a certain age should actually be put into the juvenile justice system. So we need to have a minimum age. So that's the second thing. We need to pass clean slate legislation, which is an opportunity for people to have a clean record after they've been out for a certain period of time. And we need that to be automatic. I'd like to see licensing reform happen. Right now, 1 in 5 jobs in Michigan require a license, but there's a caveat. You have to have good moral character, however that gets interpreted by the people who are making licensing decisions. Do you really need to have a clean record to be a window washer? I mean, there needs to be some thought into that. Also, you need licensing to be a social worker, and it turns out that a lot of folks who come out of prison a disproportionate number, I would say, end up in schools of social work because they want to give back and they feel like they have something to offer because of their own recovery from substance use disorder, because of their own recovery from mental illness. So they have something to offer. Why are we stopping that from happening? I would really like to see the prisoner reentry program rejuvenated. I'd like to see every single person who comes out of prison in Michigan who has a medium or a high risk of reoffending, I'd like to see them get the services and the supervision that they need to be successful. So those are some of my dreams.
Michigan Supreme Court Chief Justice Bridget McCormick and former U of M law school professor talks about her plans to reshape the judiciary in the coming years.
Great question. So independent, each of those, let me say, are important to me, but important to my colleagues as well, and also important to the public. We actually know a lot about what the public wants from their state courts because the National Center for State Courts extensively surveys the public every year. But the thing they say over and over again is they want independent courts. So they want exactly what we talked about sort of at the top of this interview, what the Founding Fathers envisioned. They want a court that's going to make independent decisions. And the best way to judge that is if whoever's mad at me on Monday is really happy with me on Friday, and that the other guy who was really happy with me on Monday is mad at me on Friday. And so far, I think we're nailing that one. I can't tell you how often I see people who are real mad about one decision, and the next week real happy. And I think, well, that's the way it goes. My colleague David Viviano told me at the start of my job, if you're not able to come to terms with the fact that you have to be willing to lose friends and lose elections in this job, you're not cut out for it. And I think he's right. That's independence. By accessibility, I mean we have to make sure our courthouse doors are open to everyone. It's not okay that people can afford more justice than other people. So we have to be able to figure out ways to make sure that people who can't afford lawyers can get their voices heard in court. And there are lots of ways we're working on that. We have a fantastic self-represented litigant website, mylegalhelp.org. it's scalable to infinity, but we're working on a bunch of other ideas for that as well, and we'll be announcing a major initiative with Access to Justice before long. So stay tuned for that. Accessibility means we need to make sure that our judges, and it's really the trial judges, again, they're the ones doing the hard work, frankly, they really are engaged with the public about what's going on and what matters to them, right? So if, we know in Washtenaw County, like Sheriff Clayton is, Sheriff Clayton knows that mental health and substance abuse are playing an enormous, oversized role in our criminal justice system. Our judges need to know that too. Sheriff Clayton knows that because he's out in the community talking to people. And because of that, he can be better responsive to what the community needs. And judges have to do that too. I feel like ours do a great job with that, but I want to emphasize that. And then what I mean by efficiency is not, saving money at the expense of any of those other values. I mean, we need our courts to be places where people can get their business done, which is usually difficult business. It's not happy things that you go to court for, in a way that doesn't take too much time or too much money. I mean, it's just, I think the court of our future is going to have to make everything simpler and easier and navigable by regular people, often without lawyers. That's just the way it's going to need to be. So we are really expanding online dispute resolution in lots of cases where people wouldn't normally be able to hire or wouldn't normally hire lawyers, like landlord-tenant cases and small claims cases, so they can actually resolve their disputes in the evenings or on weekends on their smartphones. And anyway, that's kind of what I have in mind.
Well, that Cosine Welch, former incarcerated person and current teacher at the U of M, discusses what the world of incarceration is like, as well as what it's like for those that are finishing with their sentences and return to society.
Sentenced to 22 to 40 years within the Michigan Department of Corrections. I'm fortunate enough to have been sentenced before the so-called Truth in Sentencing Bill, which means I was still eligible to gain some good time for good behavior, which is why I got out at 19 years and 9 months as opposed to 22 years. And that was an experience, 17 years old. It's funny, sometimes I realize I spent more time incarcerated than I was alive before going. And that's a strange thing to reconcile. So what do you say about a prison experience at 17 years old? I will say this. I'm fortunate enough to be doing the things that I'm doing in my personal and professional life. But I'm aware that those things are available and that happened because I had support, right? Nothing comes out of a vacuum, right? I was able to have resources even while inside. There were people, mentors who saw me, who saw something within me, right, and fostered that so that I could become an adult while in prison. It's not something that typically happens, but there are those of us who do it. And we do it because we have a community, even inside, that allows so. And so that is, like, I think the main motivating factor that allowed me to become something more than just a recidivism statistic, or to even make it out in the first place, because some people never do. It's a vicious cycle you can get caught in. Some people never make it. Some people go to prison with a specified number of years, but end up doing something inside that never allows them to come home. And some people end up dying inside. So I think the fact that I made it through that was because I had support groups.
University of Toledo professor Clinton Longenecker discusses his book, The Successful Career Survival Guide, and gives advice to people to help them achieve long-term success in today's competitive business environment.
Area, if you would, and allocating time. So a lot of times, I hear this all the time, myself included. I really need to take my tech skills up a notch. All right, so question, what tech skills? Is it your phone usage? Is it how to expand your skill set with a particular platform at work? Is it your ability to work with Excel or Google Sheets, or what does it look like? Identifying what those issues are, and then building a plan to pick up that skill set, because it takes time. And a lot of times we don't allocate appropriate levels of time to this because we're busy doing other things. But if something is truly important, we're going to allocate time and put together a plan to get there. To say, I wish I had better tech skills. I hope I have better tech skills. Wishing and hoping are not improvement strategies, if you would. So if I'm going to target something and I know my job is going to contingent upon it, I'm going to put together a plan to go up to speed. Interestingly, employers are frequently, if I were to go to my employer and say, I have this skill set, I need to upgun, I need to make it better. I've identified a training program. One day, it's $375. Could I get funds? Would you support me in that? People are amazed sometimes when they come back and say, yeah, my boss said, here. If I can get that skill set, let's go. He'll be happy to pay for it. She'll be happy to pick up the tab. Well, I would go back and say, then why don't we take advantage? But this requires a certain level of proactive thinking. And if we are so busy day in and day out and we're not taking time to think and reflect, there's a very good chance that it will not happen. I would say at the other end of the continuum, we have our Generation Z and our millennials. And we just conducted a study, and they are struggling when they go to the workforce. They have technology, but and this is for our viewers who might be mature in their career. They know how to use technology. They don't know how to solve a problem. They know how to do some very cool things with regards to their phones and their iPads and other things and other platforms that are out in front of this, but they have a hard time focusing. And they don't plan, and there's a tendency to procrastinate around things, and they might not work well in teams. So those are competitive advantages that we as adult members of the seasoned members of the workforce, as are you and I.
Right.
We have that as our competitive advantage. While they might have technology, we have pieces of the puzzle that we're bringing with us based on our experience. So I think this whole thing is, to ask yourself the question, what results is my organization paying me to deliver? Okay, part one. Part two, what activities do I need to engage in that will allow me to get at those results? So the 80-20 rule, what 20% of my activities will help me get at 80% of that nut, if you would, results I want to get at? Maybe it's coaching your people. Maybe it's process improvement. Maybe it's building a better team. Maybe it's hiring better people. But what activities are going to get you there? Now, once you know what those activities are, the question is, are you good at them? So there's nothing stopping any one of us from developing world-class talent around team building, around communication, around coaching other people, around building out a process that's seamless. We can do those things if we allocate the time and resources to do that. So that's the focal point of the Successful Career Survival Guide, is to take people on that walk, if you would, to get them to think about what they're going to do with their career to take it to the next level. And the fun part about this, and I get feedback and emails and Instagrams from all over the place around the book, people say, this really made me think. So the goal is, if we're taking the time to think, we'll probably be more proactive than if we're just in a hurried, reactive state every single day.
Holocaust survivor Irene Butter discusses her book, Shores Beyond Shores, about her experience growing up during the dark days of the late 30s and early 40s in Germany and Holland, and her remarkable survival story.
Well, it's a complicated question, It's very hard to forgive someone when that person is still mistreating you and being cruel. So it's more a question of afterwards. How do you feel about it afterwards? And, I cannot forgive somebody for what they did to others. I can only forgive what somebody did to me, myself. And, there's a side of forgiveness that's almost self-serving, selfish. Because if you have this anger and hatred inside yourself, it can eat you up. It can paralyze you. And so then you suffer from not forgiving. And so forgiveness helps you get over that, dismiss the anger and the feelings of hatred. So that's, kind of one way of dealing with it, but forgiveness is difficult. And I couldn't say if Hitler was alive today, I don't know that I could forgive him for everything he did.
Susan McGill, founder of the Betty Brigade, discusses the importance of planning for families dealing with aging parents and what to do with accumulated items when transitioning from larger to smaller abodes.
This happens all the time, and it's mainly because people don't plan. And so we really, there's a whole chapter in the book on having a trust. why it's important to have a trust. And this happened in my own family. I had to talk to my dad and say, all right, Dad, you need a trust. And he said, well, I don't have that much. I have a couple cars and a house. And I said, yeah, but it will still end up going to probate court. Probate court is where things go when there is not a will in place and people think that it will just naturally be divided. And so I am not an attorney. I am not a financial advisor, but I see that families get into problems with this. I would say probably 50% of the work that we do, people do not, there hasn't been planning in place, and there's no trust. And a trust meaning a formal document. And it's not expensive to have a trust put in place. Can I give you an example?
Sure.
So one that's in the news right now is Aretha Franklin. So Aretha Franklin, her attorney tried for years to get her to sign a trust document, and she refused. And there are still 3 wills out there that are being debated in court. Now, when you have the kind of wealth that Aretha Franklin had, what's happening is that $11 million of her estate, or thereabouts, is going to probate court. Now imagine what $11 million could have changed in this world for nonprofits, even for 11 nonprofits, for 22 nonprofits. I mean, like, $11 million is a heck of a lot of money, and that could have been changed with a signature from her. And I'm not implying that the watchers of this show have that kind of money, but what I'm saying is that when there's planning in place, when people take that extra step to have a trust, not a will, because a will can still go to probate, but a trust that protects the assets of that property, and people don't have to go to court while they're grieving, because you're already dealing with enough chaos of the loss of that parent or loved one, and then you have to go to court and figure it out. That sounds horrible.
I hope you've enjoyed our journey through the first 2 seasons here at A2 Insight. To view the actual full-length programs, please visit our YouTube website and search under A2 Insight, or follow programming schedules on CTN Channel 17 in the future. Selected full-length interviews of some of our guests also appear in printed form, with the publication of the book A2 Insight, The Interviews, Volume 1, available at Amazon Books. I look forward to welcoming more guests for Season 3 and beyond in the coming weeks and months. For A2 Insight, until next time, I'm James Trost.
Thank you.